Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. You're watching BQ Prime. We've all received those pesky telemarketing calls, haven't we? Whether it is asking whether you want a loan, whether it is saying that you've got the perfect credit card heading your way, or in fact, if you've got a vehicle, then once every year asking whether you want to get your motor insurance renewed. And this is irrespective of whether you're on DND or not, do not disturb. And the point is, you don't even know how those people got your number. Blocking those numbers don't work either. Over the past week, we've had one viral tweet that has brought all of this to the fore. Some of you have already seen that tweet and know the context. But on this conversation, I'd like to ask why there is such a profligate sharing of information when you and I have not shared that data in the first place. And we'd also like to ask whether or not you and I have a recourse. Joining me to talk about this is NS Nappinai, Supreme Court advocate and founder of Saathi, and Parijat Garg, who is a digital lending expert. Thank you so much, the both of you, for taking the time. I will start with you, Ms. Nappinai, just to understand from a legal standpoint, how is it that these people have our data in the first place? Aren't there laws preventing the sharing of that data?
Well, we are actually waiting. It's been a very long wait, in fact, for a personal data protection law. At the last consultation that the Minister of State had, he promised that what they now call digital personal data protection law is soon to come out. But when we are waiting with bated breath for the new law to come in, it's not like we don't have laws currently also. You do have minimalistic provisions under the Information Technology Act under 43A and 72A. 72A is a criminal offense, in fact, if your personal information is violated. And 43A says that if a company which has collected data in digital form is negligent in the handling of that data, and therefore if there is a data breach, then that company is liable. Very detailed rules have also been formed under 43A, which captures the basic data principles, which is of consent, purpose limitation, sharing, usage, then transfer of the data beyond the boundaries of India, etc. So we do have some laws. We also have laws in terms of the Telecom Authority, TRAI, has specifically put in license. What are the do's and don'ts? And the first thing they're not allowed to do is that they cannot violate a DND. And yet, you see what happens. I will tell you a little bit more when you come back to me on the DND aspect.
Absolutely. And you know, the context, I was trying to lay the context earlier, and I was talking about a particular non-banking financial company that spoke about this profligate calling of people asking whether they want loans. And the response really was that you have the right, or you will soon have the right, to be forgotten. The question some people are asking, Parijat, is how this information was there in the first place, because the right to be forgotten implies that you have certain data with you. You will then, once you opt to be forgotten, wipe that data from your database. The question is, how is that data shared in the first place?
So it's a very pertinent question, Alex. Specifically, when we look at data required for banking and financial services, it's required for three different purposes. One is for marketing. Second is to underwrite or assess the customer. And third is towards the collection of loans. And what we're talking about is the marketing area, where the data can come from any source, because the only thing that someone requires is a mobile number or an email ID to contact you. And that today is available at so many places, very difficult for anyone to trace back what was the origin of that data. And as we all know, for most of the businesses, the lead generation activity is top of the funnel, where the data comes from variety of sources and from variety of channels. And most of these players don't work with their own units, but they outsource this to various agencies who do this, and they are not under any kind of regulatory coverage. So this data can come from data brokers who buy this data from gray sources. This data can come from third-party databases, websites. We travel everywhere. I enter so many offices, and every office, the security guard asked me to list down my phone number there. And I don't know how that data is kept safe. Is the data getting leaked out to someone else? And there are so many such instances where I am leaving my footprint, and that footprint is gathered by such data brokers, and then it gets into these users.
Specifically, and I want to make this point very clear, specifically from the point of view of a lender, because that is essentially the point that we're making today. And unfortunately, financial services is the primary culprit when we're talking about these calls, unsolicited calls that are being made right now. Specifically, when it comes to lending, what is the kind of information that a company would or a bank would have to have of the borrower, assuming that they are a first-time borrower, for them to make that call in the first place? Do they need that information to call you?
Not really. I think for the first-time call, more often than not, it's just about phone number. If they have a name, that is good enough. They don't need anything else. They just try to call you and start that conversation. More often than not, every individual is in need of one or the other financial product. And for any diversified company which has multiple products to offer, for them, it is very easy to monetize that call because they'll be able to find one or the other need that customer requires at that point in time, and they'll be able to service that. So that's how this channel operates. It's just that you randomly start calling, and it's just a 10-digit number, and that 10-digit number can be computed with the computing power that we have today. We already know the mobile number patterns. You can just generate millions of mobile numbers and start randomly putting it on dialers. And once people start getting calls, I pick that call up, I get into the conversation. If I'm interested, they start pitching me the product. If I just disconnect, they move on.
Yeah, and it was surprising that this particular company that we're speaking about, 15% was the contribution through this push factor that they're receiving a business from, which is quite a substantial number if you think about it. Ms. Nappinai, if we're talking about how this data is received, is there implicit agreement in certain cases from the individual to share that data? So, for example, like was just pointed out by Mr. Garg, you're putting your number down in a few places. Does that implicitly give a company the right to share that data? We don't have your audio. If we can get your audio back. Yeah.
So I think certainly not. In fact, if you recollect, and I shared this as my input also on the DPDP draft that was shared. And something that Parijat mentioned was actually captured there, where it said that if you give your data when you're going to a restaurant, for instance, when you book a table, they take your mobile number. So the DPDP draft captured that would amount to implicit consent. And there I took objection saying that the implicit consent is only for the limited purpose of booking a table. Once the table is booked and utilized, the entity has no right to retain that data beyond that. But unfortunately, we have many an instance and many sources in terms of how data is captured and sold, in fact, and for very nominal rates. It used to be about 10 rupees per data point, in fact, earlier. But Alex, I wanted to red flag something else also, and this is very critical for TRAI to take note of particularly. So you asked about despite DND listing, etc. And you also mentioned about the 15% through push advertisement like this. And probably this is the reason why companies and telemarketers think that they can take this risk. So very strangely, many years back, I got a call requesting for a legal opinion on whether, and the way it works is the company provides this data to the telemarketer, and the telemarketer is supposed to scrub it through the DND registry, meaning all the DND numbers will then be removed from the list and they are supposed to call only the leftover numbers. But what happens in reality is that the scrubbing happens and then the persons who are listed on the DND numbers are the ones who get the call first. So someone had the temerity to call and ask whether I would give a legal opinion on whether it's legal or not. And I said, do you really want an opinion? Because it will obviously be negative. And the consequences of violating a DND registry means you can lose your telemarketer's license.
Right.
And yet this happens for two reasons. One is because the minute you are on a DND registry, they know it's not a cold call, you exist. And the second thing is that there is no ramifications for this kind of a blatant violation. None of us file complaints. The TRAI also has not taken any action against people for this kind of a blatant violation. And so the story goes on. So it's really critical for easier ways for us to file our complaints when DND is being violated, and for try to show through actual action that when a telemarketer violates the licensing terms, there will be consequences.
Right. I will come to the final consequence of this or whether there is a recourse, but I do want to establish one more aspect, which is that certain companies, banks or non-banking financial companies, will contend that they need certain information, especially if we're talking about fresh borrowers. They take certain information from utilities, for example, or for the payment of a postpaid mobile bill, and they use that to identify the creditworthiness of a borrower. They say that they collect this ahead of time so that the loan can get sanctioned quickly. The question is, one, you've already established that they shouldn't ideally have this information if you're not sharing it in the first place. But does not having this information preclude me as a potential borrower from receiving a loan? This one's for you, Parijat.
Not necessarily. It depends on the profile of the customer. Like you said, if it is a new to credit customer who's first time borrower, then of course the lender has limited information and it needs supplement information through what we call as alternate sources of data to assess the customer better. And quite a few of these data sources are public in nature, which can be aggregated or accessed by these lenders. And therefore, there may not be any opt-in required in quite a few of these cases. For example, if I need to get my Aadhaar authenticated, UIDAI has put in a very stringent guidelines in terms of how I have to provide my consent. But in many other cases, if my electricity bill needs to be checked on any electricity distribution company, they just need a consumer ID. They don't need anything else. There is no second factor authentication. And that information therefore becomes public as soon as someone has my electricity consumer ID. And there are numerous such examples like mobile data. If you have my mobile number, you can check what is the connection, which service provider do I work with, is this phone active or not? And that is a public set of information, which like I can find out about you. Similarly, a lender can find out about at a very large scale. And this becomes a problem when it is being done at a large scale. And today, I think when government is looking at data protection bill, this then provides like a much wider coverage, wider debate around what is public source of information, what is sensitive information, what is personal information, what can be used. And I think you were asking this earlier, if I'm not interested, can I opt out? Can I ask an institution to forget me, to delete my data, not use that information for any other purpose other than what I consented for? So all of that control can come back to the consumer, but today that is not.
Okay. So in the absence of a data protection bill, then this is the crux of the matter ultimately. What is the recourse? And two questions here, right? Ms. Nappinai, if we're talking about the individual, is there any recourse? Doesn't seem like it, but is there still something that an individual can do? And two, should the organization that is using a third-party telemarketer for their product be held responsible? And how hard should they be hit by TRAI? Because this, as you pointed out, is a criminal violation.
absolutely right. And, who better than Justice Krishna here to draw on? So I quote him, and it's a very short quote, don't worry. And he says, "And the law hangs limp. It seldom barks and never bites." And that's where the real problem lies. Firstly, you have some minimalistic provisions under the IT Act in terms of where, data breach, or where your data has been violated, or where a company has been negligent, right? So if it is data, for instance, from your banking channels, then they should be held liable. But there has to be an easy way of pursuing those kind of remedies. You don't have that under the IT Act. It was provided. You have an adjudicating authority or officer under the IT Act, and it was supposed to be an inexpensive and speedy remedy. Today, it is neither. The Secretary of the State Ministry of IT is being designated as the adjudicating officer, and they barely have time to deal with cases. And from something which used to start with a 2 rupee court fee, now they are charging ad valorem court fee. So it's neither inexpensive nor speedy today. TRAI, as I already pointed out, has not given us an easy to access remedy point. So it's important to have stringent laws, but also easy methodologies for accessing those laws. Each of us it is nuisance value enough when you get 20 calls a day, which are all spam calls, and more so when you're traveling outside India.
Yeah.
But do you really have the time to then follow through with nuisance value cases also?
Absolutely not.
Nobody has the time for that.
So then,
regulator to deal with
so then, in the absence of that recourse, as a preventive measure, should you avoid, providing your data as far as possible?
What you should do anyway.
So don't write your number down anyway.
I invited every restaurant saying, you don't need my mobile number. Either I'll come in and eat, or no problem, I'll go to the next restaurant which doesn't ask for my mobile number. Right? So we have to be a little bit more conscious and careful in where we share our data.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the bottom line. Ms. Nappinai, and of course, Parijat, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know that this is not something that has a conclusion. I guess in the absence of that data protection bill, be careful with your data. Don't share it. It's very, very important. It's private. And, well, you'll have to block calls as far as possible as things stand right now. Thank you so much for taking the time. Viewers, do stay tuned. Lots more coming up over the course of the day. This is BQ Prime.